Hello and welcome to Conversations with IFS. Conversations with IFS is brought to you in collaboration with GH1 and also with the Institute for Fiscal Studies. Our curator for today's program is Mr. Ivor Ajmendia. After the break, I'm going to introduce you to our next very eminent guest, so stay tuned. Welcome back. My guest for today's show is well known to most of us. He is a businessman, an industrialist. He has sat on many boards, and he is none other than Mr. Tony Oteng-Gyasi. Currently, Mr. Tony Oteng-Gyasi is the Managing Director and Chairman of Tropical Cable and Conductor Limited. He's also previously been on the board of the GIMPA Council and the University of Ghana Council. He is a member of the Ghana Bar Association, and he also holds a diploma in marketing, a man with very many strings attached to him. So, Mr. Oteng-Gyasi, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So what keeps most of your time, being an MD?
No, actually, I'm kind of half retired now. I still act as MD, but I'm in the phasing out stage. I mean, moving on, a new generation is coming to take over the company. And so I'm kind of taking it easy all the time.
Oh, you're chilling, in other words.
In a sense, yes.
Okay. So I'd just like to ask you, for your vast experience, you've worked for BP, you've set up your own company, etc., set on various councils, etc. So what kinds of policies, let's say over the span of our 25-year democratic dispensation, and what policies have you found that have made it most conducive for doing business in Ghana?
You know, for most of our history as a nation, we have been good students of the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, you know, and so at a top level, our policies have generally been kind of aligned to what the latest thinking in those institutions are. Unfortunately for us, there was a time when the institutions thought that creating an enabling environment, as it were, is the kind of way to go. And that once you create it, the economy, the private sector, everybody will respond, and you will get the development, the industrialization, the manufacturing that you require to employ your people and grow your economy. About a decade or less ago, it became apparent that this solution was not enough, that an enabling environment is not sufficient. It is a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition to get the kind of development you want. And so now the emphasis is going further beyond creating an enabling environment and actually finding specific ways in which you can ginger up an economy, you can help an economy. Mm-hmm. And this is what has led to the realization in our country that you need local content, you need local participation, you need to actually help people to get into business, especially in the kind of sectors that you require. And we have come to the realization in Ghana, belatedly though, that we cannot do much if we do not encourage and actually get manufacturing going. Mm-hmm. So it is a late realization, but all of a sudden there is talk about an industrialization program in Ghana. about a transformation based on industrialization. And for me, in the past 5 years or so, I think this is the most apt policy shift that I can see in our country. The need and the realization that we need to promote industrialization and production locally if we want to get this economy going.
Okay. You were previously the president of AGI. That's where probably most people know you from. What are some of the main challenges as the president of one of our big associations, especially for business people? And what were some of the main challenges you faced as president?
I think the biggest challenge to the private sector generally and to the association in Ghana is that our policy makers say one thing and do another. There is this lack of action following words. So we have situations where if you look at the major parties who have been in power in this country in the past 2 decades and look at their manifestos, you find, in fact, one manifesto even talked about having an activist state, which at AGI we thought, yes, this is the time now that we are going to have actual interventions in the economy to help the private sector. But once power is obtained, we found out that the actions did not always follow the words. And so for us, this is one of the biggest problems, because the history of development and how to develop is nothing new. We don't claim to have all the answers or even new answers. But it is for us as a nation to realize that what needs to be done should be done. We need the discipline, we need the culture, we need to put our words into action.
So, what kinds of interventions did you expect an activist state to take? Don't you expect the state to leave the private sector alone and let the market dictate things? Why do you want this to?
Let me give you an example. Unfortunately, it's a foreign example, but it illustrates it very well. When question of fossil fuels and became an issue with all the carbon emissions and all, countries around the world decided that this was a time to promote solar energy in a serious manner. So money was put into research to the extent that in Europe, in Germany, in the UK, they actually started giving people credits, money, to adopt solar panels as a way of powering their homes. And people who would go into manufacturing of solar were given tax breaks. This is the way in which a policymaker actually directs an economy where it wants it to go. So for instance, if you want to promote tourism, let's take an example from Ghana. It is not enough to say that I want to promote tourism. You need to find out what is hindering tourism. What are my tourist sites? You identify them. What is stopping people from going there? Are there roads leading to that site? Because no private industrialist, no private entrepreneur is going to construct a road to a tourist site. That is government responsibility. So you identify your tourist site. You want to construct the road there. Then you can say that when the tourists get there, what do? They need hotels, they need food, right? Who is going to go to Bui Falls and put up a hotel or a hostel for tourists? You find out that, what do I need to do? Do I need to give tax breaks? Because if you put a hotel there now, what is the guarantee that people are going to come? How long will it take to market people to get there? So you say that for the next so many years, or until you reach a certain level of occupancy, I'm giving you a tax break. So this is just to give you an idea of how policy can be made to aid development and to aid growth.
Okay. So what you're saying is basically the business community in Ghana want the government to intervene in certain areas, yes? But you don't necessarily want a predatory state.
No, of course not. I mean, these interventions across the world. I mean, why is America putting taxes on solar panel imports? Why is the Trump administration agreeing that they're going to tax steel imports? I mean, this is the way in which you use policy actions to move the economy in areas which are favorable to your country, to your private sector, and your citizens.
And what indicators, sorry, do you give to government to show them, to signpost what areas could best help you as business people?
Some of it are so obvious, and we put it every year. The association makes recommendations to government for its budget. But another example which will illustrate this very clearly, you have a nation where about, 5-6 years ago, we had a deficit in electricity. We had blackouts and all that and all that. It's obvious that you cannot build an economy if you don't solve that problem. But access to electricity is a different problem from cost of electricity. If you are going to solve the problem in a manner that at the end of the day, power becomes available, but at an exorbitant cost, you're not helping industry, you're not helping your people. The fact that you have an emergency in your hands, and it shouldn't have been an emergency if we had been planning, but the fact that you have an emergency in your hands does not mean that your solutions should be high costs. If there are high costs, then you need to find ways in the temporary to protect your people from such high costs, especially the productive part of your economy. I hope you understand.
Yes, I do. And I'm sure, as you were previously EC board chair, yes, and I'm sure you proffered many of those solutions when you were EC board chair. Let's move over to something you've just spoken about. You talked about local content, yes? And it's quite a buzzword, yeah, because many Ghanaian businesses want to get involved in the industries that are here. But you've previously been a little critical on some of our, especially our smaller businesses, because of their failure to adapt and maybe adopt new technologies. So I'd like to ask you, what are some of the things that really do hinder our businesses from participating in some of our local industries, let's say oil and gas or mining? What are some of the problems?
Several, but we can mention one or two. Local content promotion is not something which replaces effort of the local entrepreneur, of the local industrialist, of the local businessman. Local content promotion points you in a certain direction. As a business person, man or woman, it is also your job to make sure that you can take advantage of that policy. So you say that for oil rigs, all the food that is sold, is eaten on oil rigs, should be locally produced rather than imported, which has happened before. There was a time when even water on the rigs were brought in from outside the country. It is for your business people to respond to that and say that now this is an opportunity for us. So how do I provide the kind of water whose quality, whose standards is acceptable to whoever is buying the water for the rig? And that is where your local person comes up. And then, of course, it is not just the local person, you also need financing. So what is the cost of money in your country? Is the cost of money at the level where if you borrow money in order to produce water, you produce it at a price which is competitive? So all these factors come into play. And that is why we say that development is a complex process. And it needs monitoring at every stage. It needs tinkering, it needs nudging, and we shouldn't assume that things will happen. And that is also the job of the policymaker. So in every country which does well, you see the policymaker and the private sector virtually in sync. One does not replace the other. You cannot have development when you have even an inefficient public sector, or a non-understanding public sector, or a public sector which thinks that it is in competition with the private sector. You don't. The two have to be in sync in order to develop the kind of development we need as a nation.
But my interest is also in how do you bring up the small businesses that you're talking about, the ones that fail to adopt or adapt? How do we bring them up to that level, let's say, where they're able to produce water that of an international standard? Yeah, how do we do that?
Yes, I mean, the point is that when you identify the entrepreneurs, you train people to be entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship can be taught, and it's actually taught. People go to business school, they learn how to become businessmen. They learn the nuts and bolts of running a business. They learn what is financial statements and all that. And then they apply it in the business. You cannot run a business as a mom and pop shop. That is a different kind of business. But the kind of businesses we are talking about to grow your economy, to employ thousands of people and get your economy going, has to be run like a business. And that is where government, even by your education policy, what kind of graduates are coming out of your schools? So you decide as an economy that these are the kind of graduates I need in order to deliver the kind of development that I want, the kind of business people that I want. And it's a planning process which you cannot take your hands off it or your eyes off it at any time.
Of an entrepreneurial mindset, you think that we need to inculcate an entrepreneurial mindset within our business people?
That is just one aspect of it. In fact, even sometimes even more important than the entrepreneurial mindset is the management mindset.
Okay, please elaborate.
Let me elaborate. I mean, if you look at some of the multinationals here, you find out that at the top of their management, they are not hiring as many Ghanaians as they should. How come? That is where I talk about the management mindset. An entrepreneur, yes, he will set up a business, he will recognize an opportunity, bring resources together, and get the business going. But you need a manager, somebody who understands the process of running that business. The two are not necessarily the same. Sometimes you meet an entrepreneur who is also a good manager, but very often it's not the same. So you need to be able to find people who will manage business, people who understand how to manage business. And people have to be prepared to learn. Too many of our people think that they'll become an entrepreneur and run a business and make a lot of money. It doesn't happen that way. Over 90% of businesses will fail anyway, you know. So people have to understand that even more important than being an entrepreneur is how to be a good manager.
Okay, thank you very much. On that note, we'll take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. You're welcome back from the break. Today, my guest is Mr. Tony Oteng-Gyasi. Mr. Oteng-Gyasi, again, welcome back. Ghana imports a lot, over $1 billion worth of products. And I just want to know, what is the impact that these huge sums of imports have on the local economy and indeed local business people?
That's an interesting question because it's something which has come up very recently. You know, every item you import into your economy has been made somewhere by somebody. So to the extent that when you make something, you employ people, you employ resources to make it. And then when you sell, you trade, you distribute it. So whether you import something or produce it in your own country, as for trading and distribution, it is always there. You are not going to miss it. So employment from trading and distribution is a given. But it is the employment from actually making the things, from manufacturing, which is the biggest part of the employment. So the more you import, the more you deprive your own people of employment. The thing is, and it is for this and for other reasons that you find that in virtually every country, when you import something, there's always a tariff on it. No government prefers importation over local production. So your policy should always be to prefer local production rather than import.
Would you advocate for import substitution?
Import substitution is one way of going. But more importantly than even that is the fact that when you put that tariff there, the tariff represents several things. It represents your preference for local production. It represents, in a case like Ghana, where our local environment is more expensive. Our electricity is more expensive, our water is more expensive, etc. Our productivity is not so high. It represents a way to level the playing field for a foreign manufacturer as against a local manufacturer. So you have a tariff, an import duty, an import levy, whatever you want to call it, right? Now, when you have that situation, but people import into your country and manage not to pay that levy in the name of they are traders and they should be allowed to trade, then you are taking the interest of the individual importer against the interest of the whole nation. And that is why the role of agencies like the Ports Authority, the Customs especially, the Customs Excise and Preventive Service, SEPS, whose duty it is to collect import duty, their role is critical. And when they are lax and not collect the duty as prescribed by law, then you have a situation in your country where you are shooting yourself in the foot. Because in essence, you are depriving your people of the jobs which come from local manufacturing and shipping those jobs to foreigners.
Yeah, but can it not be argued that some of our import taxes and import duties are rather expensive, given that we don't have a very solid industrial or manufacturing base? For example, let's say with importing of cars, we don't manufacture cars here, yet the import duties on vehicles is quite tremendous. So, you know, I understand where you're coming from with businesses that are already, or manufacturing companies that are already here, but what about for things where we don't have any form of manufacturing here?
Two answers to that. At what stage are you going to start manufacturing your own cars? If you are going to let them come in always cheap because you don't do it, do you ever want to start manufacturing cars, or you want to give up yourself on it that I will never manufacture cars? Of course, you don't want to do that, right? So it is good to have an import duty, if only to encourage people to start manufacturing cars here. And duty setting is not an art. It is actually a science. Yes. I mean, you don't just get up and say that I am going to tax tobacco at 40% and tax water at only 5% if you bring it into the country. There's a reason for it, right? Yeah. So, like I said, the inefficiencies in your local economy needs to be taken into account in your tariff setting. And once you do that right, don't forget also that in your country, as you produce in your country, you are paying your people money. And so their ability to afford even the expensive things is enhanced because they are getting a payment, which is a virtuous cycle. The opposite is that you do not allow your people to manufacture because you want cheap goods. So cheap goods come in, right? The few who can afford it can afford it. The majority of the people cannot afford it. So they see the cheap goods, but they don't have jobs to be able to afford it. Of what use is that to your country? Okay. So that is a vicious circle. That is the opposite. And you need to plug yourself into the cycle, which is employment, incomes, production, and you keep that rolling.
Clearly, businesses cannot avoid fiscal management and the way in which we tax and we spend money. What signals are being sent to businesses as to the way in which government wants to go with regards to taxing and spending?
You know, the important thing about fiscal management is more than what we always say. We give the impression that balance your budget, your revenues and your expenditure should be as near to each other as possible. And that is true. But that is only half the story. The other half, and sometimes the even more important half, is what government is spending its money on, the expenditure. Is government getting value for that money? If government is not getting value for that money, of course you are going to balance your budget, but then you do not get the development impact of a balanced budget because you have a stable currency, you have a stable exchange rate, all which come from balancing your budget, right? But because you are overpaying the few people who government is buying resources from, those people, money gets concentrated in their hands. When money is concentrated in their hands, what they do is that they put pressure on your foreign exchange because they have made unjustified profits. All that they want to do is to send the money to Dubai and Switzerland or wherever people send their monies to. So fiscal consolidation, fiscal balance is important, but it must be accompanied by constant value for money in government expenditure.
So would you propose that we have some kind of, value for money audits on all of the projects and programs that government undertakes?
We already do. That is what you have a public procurement board for. I mean, that is one of the roles of a public procurement board. It's one of the roles of even a tendering process. So if you have an open, competitive tender, then that is the best way in which, as for audits are a post-event. You really want to have a process leading up to the government expenditure, which gives the government the best value for money. And that is what we should be insisting that our public procurement laws are adhered to strictly. The processes and the procedures are also kept. And too often we make emergencies which needn't be. Sometimes somebody, if government needs a glass of water, and I know that it is needed for a special school in Jowulu, they must have a glass of water, and government is procuring it. And I wait until the last minute.
And everybody's thirsty.
And everybody is thirsty. What happens? So you have to rush, you have to do single source, and in that process, you avoid making sure that you have value for money. So you need to plan your processes and keep to your plans and keep to your schedules.
Okay, so as an international businessman such as yourself, how do legislations like Public Financial Management Act and the rest, how do they impact on your work?
Yeah, they are very, very important because, like we have said, those are the areas where you make sure that if government is getting value for money and government is balancing its budget as much as possible, and even that may not be required, it's actually advisable for government to inflate the economy a little. That is, but let's say government is balancing its budget. Then you have stable exchange rates, you have low interest rates, and this impacts everybody in the country. It's not only a businessman like me running a business and taking loans from the bank, which it impacts. It impacts you if you take a mortgage. If the interest rates in the country are low, it impacts you. It impacts everybody who is working. Somebody running a school, it impacts the person. So, prudent and proper economic management is a cross-cutting matter for the whole country.
Okay, and what about anti-corruption laws? Do you think we need more anti-corruption laws that even extend to the private sector?
What we need is just enforcement of the laws we have. And all the studies have shown a lot of the corruption in our country is procurement corruption. It's around government purchasing things at inflated rates. That is the bottom of the matter, So and that is why this whole public procurement law and things were put in place. But this is where, if you don't have the right people running some of those institutions, it is not enough to have the institutions. You also need to ensure that the people running the institutions are the right people. And they should be people with a backbone. People who can stand up or sit up, as the case may be, and say that, look, this is the way it's meant to be done, and this is the way I'm going to do it. So I'm not going to do sole sourcing, even though whoever, I mean, my boss wants it to be sole sourced. I don't think it is right. And I mean, when you have people with a backbone, and this is what, as a nation, I think we should be spending time on, finding people who believe in the country and who have a backbone to stand up for what is proper.
Easier said than done, especially in a culture where ours, if, as you said, if your boss gives you an instruction and you don't do it, even if it's because of a firm conviction, you're considered just blatantly insubordinate, you know? And it's rare that you'll get somebody else to back you up, even if what you're doing is right. How do we overcome this?
Just by training, by the kind of education we give our children, by how we train them, you know. And I do not believe that is easier said than done. I mean, all across this country, there are people, whether in the police service, in the armed forces, in the public service, in the civil service, there are people there who know what is right and insist on doing what is right. It is for us to empower people. It is for us to give them a chance to do well. Because, the alternative is too frightening that we'll give up. As for our country, we cannot insist on the right thing being done. That is the kind of attitude we don't want to have.
I think my own personal conviction, if you'll allow me, is that I think maybe if sanctions are applied where people deviate from doing the wrong, then you'll find that people will sit up, as you said, and do the right thing.
Excellent. I couldn't agree with you more. Yes, sanctions. That is the right thing. And there are people who are ready to apply the sanctions. So we should give them a chance. When you are doing your staff assessment, you are doing your staff appraisal, do it with honesty and integrity, with sincerity, and do the right thing. And when the right thing is done, we are all right. If the wrong thing is done, apply the sanctions, like you said.
Okay, thank you very much. And on that note, we'll go for a quick break. Stay tuned, there's lots more to come. Welcome back. My guest today is the Managing Director of Tropical Cable and Conductor Limited, Mr. Tony Oteng-Gyasi. Welcome back.
Thank you very much.
We talked previously about local content. And local content really does seem to be quite a buzzword because you have many new, very young, budding Ghanaian businesses wanting to, in essence, compete with international businesses in certain key sectors. Yes. I want us to try and unpack this because many local companies have argued that the same incentives that we give to foreign companies to come and invest are not offered to them and that they need a helping hand. What helping hand do they need? Are they lazy? Are they unable to do the work? Or are their concerns genuine?
I think that when you talk about foreign companies coming to invest, you have to differentiate between the different sectors of the economy. If somebody is coming to invest in mineral resources, gold mining, bauxite mining, oil mining, right, that is a wasting resource, which will get finished at some time. So for that you want to make sure that you are keeping as much local benefits from the resource as possible before the gold runs out, you know. So the conditions for local content in that area are different from somebody who is coming to invest in Ghana to manufacture tiles or floors or cameras or something, right? But to put it generally, local content does not necessarily mean Ghanaian-owned companies. It means that any company which is registered in Ghana, except that when it's mineral resources, you want to say that a certain proportion of the ownership should reside in Ghana so that a lot more of the profit stays in Ghana. But that is another matter. So once you register a company in Ghana, you become a Ghanaian registered company and you qualify for local content. Because, I mean, you end up employing Ghanaians, which is what we want. So local content is something which foreigners are not necessarily against local content. The Unilevers and the big manufacturing companies who came here were foreign companies. But it got to a stage where everybody thought UAC was Ghana and all that. But they were essentially foreign companies. Once they start producing and manufacturing things in your country, that is what globalization is all about.
Able to localize. If you look at Unilever, for example, the reason why people did not know that it was necessarily a foreign company is the faces that you see working there are Ghanaian. That's not necessarily the case in some other sectors. So I think perhaps what you're talking about more is a localization, even of international companies working in Ghana.
It is more than localization of international companies because it is also, you know, there is, in addition to local content, there's what we call local participation. Local participation refers to the share ownership of the company by Ghanaians.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we need to distinguish between the two. And we need in our policy making, depending on the sector. I mean, if it's a gold mine, like we said, I want local participation at the highest possible level. Because this is gold which is going to run out one day, and they will leave us with the Konongos townships of this world, which were once thriving, bustling, I mean, industrial concerns, mining gold, and now are dead. And so you want to make sure that as much of the wealth generated is left behind here so that you can use it in other sectors of the economy.
Yes.
There's other areas of manufacturing. You need to look at each area and come out with the local participation rules and laws concerning it. And this is where, like we keep saying, development is not a one-size-fits-all. You don't make one law and go to sleep, you know. It's detailed planning every step of the way, every year.
So I want us to move on to the kind of bigger picture things. You know, we often talk about globalization, and you know, in Ghana we're seeing some of the effects of globalization in terms of businesses. We have, as you mentioned earlier, lots of cheaper imports, let's say, coming in from especially the Far East. So to what extent is this aspect of globalization a disincentive for local businesses? So, for example, you know, it might be easier for me to, you know, start importing cheap things from elsewhere than looking towards developing a manufacturing factory or whatever in Ghana. You know, how
Two things. When you talk of cheap imports, immediately you are talking of quality, first of all, right? You want to make sure that the quality coming into your country is right. And you don't do it because, I mean, you don't do it because you think that you want to deprive your citizens of rights. It is not your right to go and buy a glass which, I mean, when you hold it will break in your hands. And it is not your right as a citizen to buy toothpaste which will end up destroying your teeth. That is why we have Food and Drugs Board, we have Standards Board. It is the role of governments also to protect citizens from themselves. Because, I mean, we are mere citizens. We don't know a lot. And that is why we have those regulatory bodies to help us. So it is not right that any cheap goods from wherever, should be allowed into your country. So that is the first thing. You have a quality issue there. And it is the job of a government to protect a citizen, if even only from themselves. Right?
Yeah.
So cheap goods, no government should allow cheap quality into his country in the name of cheap goods. But the second point is, how come it is cheaper there? We talked about the operating environment. Right? Does it mean that you are going to run a country where, because you can get something cheaper from another country, you will never import, you will never produce anything? Because in the global world today, there is nothing you want to set out manufacturing as a country if you haven't done it before. That somebody somewhere out there in the world will not be prepared to sell to you cheaper than you can make yourself. Because you are starting out. You don't have economies of scale. Your workers are not skilled. They are not the most productive. You may not even have the latest equipment. Doesn't mean that you should never try to manufacture anything. And that is what, as a country, those are the decisions we need to make. Are we going to insist that it is our right to make things and not just provide jobs for our people, but also help them train to become even more skillful, help them train to become even more productive at the jobs they are doing? I think every citizen has a right to education. And being trained to work on a machine and get even better at it is part of your right as a citizen. It's part of your education as a citizen.
But one of the benefits of globalization is the massive spread of ICT. So the harnessing and use of ICT is something that can help our businesses progress. But to what extent are Ghanaian businesses in general using this very, very valuable tool to develop their businesses?
It is a benefit. Globalization, ICT spread is a benefit of globalization, but it's also a very dangerous trend, which developing African countries like us need to be careful about. Why do you think a big country like China, does not allow WhatsApp or Facebook? WhatsApp, China has its own equivalent of WhatsApp called WeChat, right? Because what is the point in the name of globalization to have one guy sitting in Silicon Valley or wherever, develop an app for the whole world, and he employs all his people in Silicon Valley or where he thinks it's best for him, and he gets all the profits, and everybody else in the world uses that?
Do you think it's to control information?
Apart from controlling information, I'm talking about economic growth and economic production, really. That is what I'm talking about. Okay. Forget about the information. That is a whole different, the use of it to control governance and voting and politics and all that. Forget about it. I'm just talking about the economics of it, And that is why bigger economies are finding out that it is not enough. So the European Union is always finding ways to put huge taxes on Google. 3 billion, 4 billion. They find reasons to tax Google. Because you are generating wealth from our citizens, and all that wealth is staying in your country or wherever, whichever tax haven you want to send it to. And so those are some of the dangers of falling in love with globalization totally. It has its advantages. But every nation, every government, every people should decide which aspects of globalization are best for you. And those aspects which do not fit in with your own development paradigm, you need to find ways to control.
Okay. So which, in your opinion, which aspects are best for us here in Ghana?
I think that the ICT, like you say, the fact that telephone calls have become cheaper, communication, yes. But even then, if I were making policy, I would say that, should we look at a way in which everybody making a free WhatsApp call internationally pays some token which comes to Ghana government?
We pay for data.
You pay for data, but that data you pay for goes to the cell phone company whose device you are using. Of course, the cell phone company ends up paying some corporate taxes and all that. But we know, I mean, there are tax avoidance schemes and all that. But that's a different matter. But for our nation, you know, what happened to the talk time tax, which was passed some time ago? You remember that?
I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, so these are ways in which, as globalization becomes bigger and wider, governments also have to find new ways of raising revenue, new ways of making, because globalization will not make the road in front of the Tema industrial area. We have the West Road in Ghana, in the Tema heavy industrial area. And globalization, I mean, and our workers are on WhatsApp and all their money is ending up in Silicon Valley, and Ghana government does not have money to fix that road. So we shouldn't be afraid to think up new ideas, new ways, you know. But even more important, it is our citizenry, you know, should not go for low-cost solutions. That we live in a country where too often all of us as a people think that the cheaper the better. That everything, if we can get for free, why should we pay for it? It may look like beneficial to us in our individual selves, but for our collective good as a country, if as a result, your roads are not fixed, your hospitals are not the best, we should realize that the cheaper is better, is not good for us as a nation.
So, Mr. Oteng-Gyasi, over the years, we've had various business policies, interventions. Now even we have a Ministry for Business Development. Are all these interventions, are they necessary? Are they bringing about the desired effects? I want to know your view on this.
No, you have all those multiple policies, not policies, multiple organizations, ministries and all. It's a sign of a certain frustration that we are trying this and we are not getting the results, you know. But I think the real reason why we are not getting the results is because we are not going into the details of it. We are not doing the detailed planning. I mean, in business, a lot of the time, what is obvious is correct. I'll give you an example. We live in Ghana with how many million hectares of land? Agriculture, you have water, you have sunshine, you have all that. So Ghana ought to be able to produce fruits, you know. We should be an effective, competitive producer of fruits. Take it, pawpaw, pineapples, whatever, right? If we are, and fruits are the raw material for making fruit juice, so why do we have to import fruit juice? So you look at it that way and find out that how come is our fruit production too expensive? And go into it. Are we getting the right varieties of fruit? Are we planting it in the right places, the right kind of irrigation at the right time of the year? Do we have the right expertise, people who know about the fruit, the right pest control and everything? You know, because if you have these, there's no reason why anybody should be able to produce pineapples or pawpaw cheaper than Ghana anywhere in the world. And once that is your raw material, you move to the next step. So how am I going to process it? Am I getting the right machinery, the right people? So in effect, you can take agro-processing and say that where we are as a nation, our very geographical location means that if I take 10 agro-products, I should be able to process them and become competitive in the world in these products. And put your money behind that vision.
Initiatives such as One District, One Factory be, you know, a kind of music to the ears of local business people?
Exactly. So, but that is where we have what I sometimes call the half-hearted approach. So you identify, you want to do something about it. But the solution is not necessarily in sloganeering or setting up multiple institutions, right? The solution is getting down to do the work and finding out what is happening. So how come somebody has a $45 million fruit juice processing plant in Ghana, and yet he cannot compete against imports of fruit juice from South Africa. He's selling in Nigeria because Nigeria is not allowing fruit juice into their country without the right duties elements being paid. But Ghana is allowing people to buy fruit juice from Nigeria. They don't pay the import duty and they sell it in Ghana, or they pay a fraction of the import duty and they sell it in Ghana. So as a result, the real bottleneck in the system there then is another government institution, whoever is responsible, SEPS, responsible for making sure that the right duties are paid. So you can do all your interventions, but if you don't identify what is the real bottleneck, and the real bottleneck in this case is another government institution, which has the duty to make sure that if you bring fruit juice from this thing, from outside Ghana, you pay a certain duty, and they let it in without people paying the duty. As to how the people do it, it's immaterial. You need also to investigate that and find how they manage to do it in order to resolve the problem. So it's a question of our, as a nation, getting down to the brass tacks and doing the work that we need to do.
So what's the outlook for Ghanaian businesses with all these interventions and policies that we've talked about? What does the future look like?
It looks good. I say it looks good because of two things. I mean, in the past year or so, this country has managed to stabilize some of the macro indicators, like exchange rates. I mean, interest rates are trending downwards. In the past year, we seem to have a certain stability, which in previous times we have also had. The difference this time is that we are having that stability in a period when we don't have booming commodity prices. Because Ghana, whenever we have had economic stability, means the price of gold has shot up, the price of cocoa has shot up, then all of a sudden we seem to be okay. But the unique thing for me this time is that the price of gold hasn't shot up, the price of cocoa is at an all-time low, and yet the policymakers seem to have been able to stabilize the economy, which is a good sign. The question now is that how do we build on that stability? And that is where the institutions like SEPS and what they do or what they do not do. Because this is a time to develop products and manufacture them locally. Fortunately, and this is another reason for my optimism, our main competitor countries like China, China is moving away from certain low value manufacturing, right? So it is a chance for us to step in and start our own manufacturing. But it's a chance which, if we do not take now, and when I say now, I'm talking of the next 4 or 5 years. If we do not get our act together and take it, we may again lose it and lose it for a very long time. Why do I say so? We are not the only people in Africa, in our part of the world, who are recognizing these signs. Nigeria is doing so. Kenya is doing so. Ethiopia is doing so. So all these countries see that, this opportunity is there, and they are going for it. The rate at which Ethiopia is industrializing now is the fastest industrial growth in Africa for the past 3 or 4 decades. And they are working actively at it. And all these bottlenecks we have been talking about in Ghana, they are working at it and making sure that they are industrializing. So it is for us to get our act together. We have a unique opportunity once more as a nation. We have missed it before in previous times. The economic historians will tell you, if there's time, we can go about. But we now have another opportunity to actually get it up and take off as an economy. Whether we do it is the matter.
So let's work towards taking advantage of this unique opportunity. Mr. Oteng-Gyasi, thank you very much for being our guest today on Conversations with IFS. Viewers, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and we'll be back next week with another guest. Goodbye.